golden silence, not the quiet of emptiness, but the humming kind. The kind that lives in the last light of day, in the rustle of pine needles just before dusk. In that breath the world takes before something begins. Somewhere in a corner of South Carolina most maps ignore, there stood a boy beneath a bent rim, alone, his socks sweat-soaked, his shadow stretched long by a falling sun. No camera, no crowd, just the gentle rhythm of a basketball returning to his hands like a secret only he knew. He was long, thin, all arms and legs, like a sketch waiting to be finished. Kevin, not KG, not the big ticket, not yet, only Kevin, a boy with something clawing its way up from silence. The houses in Malden were built close, kept secrets tight. Grown folk spoke in whispers, and kids learned early, don't draw too much attention. Kevin didn't speak much, but talk isn't the only way to make noise. On the blacktop of that little town, in the spaces between homework and streetlights, he dripped sweat onto cracked concrete like holy water. Layup after layup, turnaround jumper, elbow fade, not for applause, there was none, but because something inside demanded it. It wasn't joy. Not exactly, but not anger either. Call it pressure, call it calling. Sometimes, a heart can feel like it's been lit from the inside, like the air itself is too small to contain what's dawning within you. That's what it was for him, a quiet, steady burn, each dribble a prayer, each rebound a vow. People think legends arrive loud, but Kevin, he was a whisper, wrapped in a silence so loaded it felt like thunder on delay. Inside, he was already yelling. There were few places safer than the court. The lines didn't ask where you'd been. The rim never judged. The ball only cared if you got back up. That mattered, because outside those fences, South Carolina was watching, and Kevin. He'd already learned not to trust what rested too easy. At school, kids clumped together across drifting lines of color. Teachers watched certain students close, and Garnett, tall and uncommon, moved through halls as both hope and target. He didn't know the rules, not all of them, but he could feel them pressing. So instead, he played and played every hour. Every worn grip on that orange leather, another sentence written in a story nobody else could hear yet. At home, the walls were thin. His mother worked long. There were nights with no music, no laughter, just muffled television behind doors, and the echo of sneakers across an empty driveway. He wasn't trying to escape. He was just trying to see farther, past the pine trees, past the cracked sidewalks, through the window of a life that didn't end on this street. Back then, success wasn't a goal. It was oxygen, an unspoken fact he had to chase, or drown waiting. He didn't call it destiny. He didn't talk about it much at all. But inside that quiet, something was raging. And here's the thing about a fire. It doesn't always start with a spark. Sometimes it starts with stillness. Stillness so still it starts to hum. Hum so loud it becomes a scream. But only if you know how to listen. And far off, inside, a nearly invisible boy from Malden history was listening, because before the noise, before the headlines and the MVP chants, before the curse words yelled into arenas so loud it cracked the floor, there was stillness, a silence that asked nothing, yet gave everything, and a boy who answered it with the only language he knew: work, sweat, hunger, and waiting for the world to catch up to the roar growing quietly inside him. The town of Malden didn't move fast. It was the kind of place where mornings settled like mist and names lingered longer than footsteps. Everyone knew everyone, or thought they did. And sometimes they thought they knew you before you even opened your mouth. Kevin had learned to keep his voice tucked behind his teeth, not because he had nothing to say, but because the silence brought him space to think, space to breathe, space to be something more than what they said he was. He wasn't poor, not in the starving sense, but money didn't flow. His mother, Shirley, worked hard, harder than most saw, and when Kevin laced up his shoes, when he stepped into the open heat of day, it wasn't recreation, it was release. The Malden gym became sacred, not because it was beautiful, but because it forgave. Sweat fell easier there. Time moved. Different. The air inside the wood-paneled walls had memory, and Kevin carved his own into it. Day by day, people watched. Some clapped, some whispered, "Tall boy, fast hands." But he laughed too loud, got serious too fast, didn't quite fit, a little too much in all the quiet places. Still, the ball listened. He'd play alone, mostly. Let the echoes be his coach, imagined. Defenders counted out game winners under his breath. He said little in class, but out here, the way the ball bounced was a language plain to him. He spoke it fluently. The town didn't always understand that kind of obsession. It looked like arrogance if you weren't looking closely. But he wasn't showing off. He was holding on. Then came the fall. Not a stumble, a fracture, a scuffle in a hallway. Talk turned sharp, shoulders brushed wrong, and suddenly everything narrowed. Accusation, fear, judgment. It moved fast, faster than truth could speak. His name was in mouths it didn't belong to. His silence was taken for guilt. Police headlines, rumors, overlapping like static. They didn't ask who touched who, or what words came first, because Kevin fit a story they'd already been told. One fight, one heated, foolish moment, like any teenager might have, and suddenly the weight of Malden tilted against him. He felt the town close like a fist. Friends turned distant. Doors didn't open as quickly. Teachers wore new expressions, guarded and unsettled. He was 17. 17 and already learning that talent doesn't always protect you. That in some places, brilliance makes you a target. It happened fast, but the decision was slow. His mum saw it. The walls caving, the town folding in. And one night, when the air held no answers, just questions unspoken, she told him they were leaving. Not just the house, the town, the life. There was no celebration, just a suitcase, some silence, and the understanding that home no longer meant safety. Chicago was waiting, and Malden, it shrank behind them. Not erased, but filed away in a place inside him where pain isn't forgotten, just translated. Leaving didn't feel like escape. It felt like exile. But in exile, something else wakes up. The part of you that knows summertimes, the place you begin can hold the weight of what you're meant to become. Chicago doesn't wait for warmth. Winters their punch through coats, and people walk like they've got somewhere more important to be. Fast, forward, focused. It's a city built on rhythm, on grind. And for a 17-year-old kid from South Carolina, that rhythm hit like a blow to the chest. Kevin Garnett stepped off the bus, carrying more than a duffel bag. He carried exile, carried questions, carried the soft pieces of himself wrapped tight, protected. Farragut's Academy wasn't glamorous, not the kind of prep school you see in movies, but within it lived hope. Unpolished, raw, sharp-edged hope. And for Kevin, it was a restart. In a place that didn't care where he came from, as long as he could play. He could dot, and then some. In the gym, the air was charged. Old hardwood, tall windows, footsteps echoed, whistles stabbed, and Garnett moved through it all like a question mark, becoming an exclamation. He grew louder there, not just in volume, but in presence. This city didn't whisper. It barked, and Kevin learned to bark back. No more hiding behind silence. Now he yelled through his sweat, roared off fast break dunks. He stared down defenders like they'd insulted his mother. He made room where there wasn't supposed to be. Room. Coach Wolf Nelson watched as the boy from Malden changed. His body thickened, his hunger sharpened, and around him gathered a crew young Chicago ballers who saw in Kevin not just height or skill, but command. He became more than a baller. He became a symbol, visible, powerful, dangerous in the best way. The city had that effect, but it also asked for more than it gave. Every corner had tests. Eyes followed him. Down hallways, not the same suspicion of Malden, but the kind of interest that sizes you up before asking what you cost. One night, he came home late, shoulders slumped, dropped his bag by the door, and just sat. The weight hit harder in silence. In those hours when even Chicago's hum faded, he wanted to quit sometimes. Not the game, never the game, but the pressure, the eyes, the expectations that stacked like bricks on his chest. He missed home, not the town, but the idea of it, a place where you could just be, just breathe, not turn every possession into proof of worth. But dreams bring sacrifice, and Kevin's dream was growing too big for high school gyms. People started showing up, agents in suits, recruiters with clipboards, magazine writers with questions that assumed answers. He handled it the only way he knew. He worked harder, he ran harder, he played every game like it owed him something. When he wasn't on the court, he studied tape, old games, Russell, Malone, Bird. He watched for the little things, footwork, emotion, control, and in the quiet moments, he talked to those ghosts, asked them things out loud, tapped the VHS player like it might answer back. It wasn't just about greatness, it was about direction, what to do with the fire, now that it was raging. He didn't want to be forgotten. That was the deepest fear, to burn so hard and still be ignored. And then a question arrived, shaped like ambition. Skip college, go now, straight to the league. No one said it directly at first, just a whisper during a practice, an offhand comment after a 36-point scrimmage, a phone call his mum took in the kitchen. Voice low, but it grew. People laughed when they heard it. Straight from high school, too skinny, too raw, too emotional. Kevin listened, took every doubt and stitched it into his soul. He knew what they didn't. The fire was no longer a flicker. It was ready to leap. He hadn't even graduated yet, but he knew the chapters ahead were already there, hidden in fog. He just had to press forward. So, one night, sometime after midnight, when the air in the city hung thick and the future smelled like ozone, he made a decision. He would try, not just to jump, but to explode. And somewhere in the distance, history stirred again. It wasn't certainty, it wasn't confidence. It was something quieter than that. A knowing tucked deep inside a teenage thunderstorm. Wearing size 16 shoes, Kevin didn't have everything figured out, but he knew enough. Staying still would burn worse than failing forward. He sat with his mother, Shirley, one evening with the weight of two futures in front of them. College safe, proven, a stepping stone, or the NBA chaos myth, the unknown. For days, he didn't say much. He just stared out windows like there was an answer drifting on the wind. But when he finally spoke, his voice was firm. "I think I have to do it." The voices came in loud, then coaches, commentators, family friends who meant well. "You're not ready. You need structure. No high school kid can survive that league." But ready doesn't always mean prepared. Sometimes it means willing to take the hit, the fall, the silence. So, he entered the 1995 NBA draft. A boy among men, a leap so few had dared since Moses Malone decades before. And on draft night, his hands shook. Not from fear, but from everything rushing in at once. Malden, Chicago, the gym. The noise, the silence, the ache, the push, all of it arriving in that moment. The name was called Kevin Garnett, 5th overall. Minnesota Timberwolves, a snowy northern city with no championship banners. A franchise still figuring out who it was. And now, a teenager was about to carry it. He smiled wide that night. His suit too big, eyes wider still, but behind the grin was something older, a seriousness that had followed him since the blacktop days. He was about to learn. The NBA doesn't care about your potential, it only cares what you produce. Training camp felt like a foreign country, men with grown man bodies, veterans who raised eyebrows at him like, "Is this real?" Doug West guarded him rough in practice. Tom Gugliotta barked at missed assignments. The coaches pushed, and then pushed again. Kevin didn't respond with words. He responded with energy, with defense, with care, with a constant refusal to break. But the doubt followed him for months. Reporters asked if he was a novelty, if this was a mistake, if maybe the fire they thought they saw was just a flicker after all. So, he stayed late, first in the gym, last to leave, wore sweat like armor, and around January something shifted. A play, a steal, a dunk, a scream, loud and sudden. The bench lit up, and the silence began to rip. That was the beginning, not of dominance, not yet, but of belief, not just from others, from himself. He finished the season with flashes, moments, where it was clear that this 19-year-old wasn't just surviving, he was learning how to lead. Veterans left. Coaches changed, but Garnett remained, it constant in the midst of a rotating scene. The franchise began hitching itself to his spirit, and he, still just a boy, welcomed the weight with arms bigger than they had any right to be. Slowly, not explosively, not all at once, but deliberately, he became the cornerstone. And though the numbers rose, it wasn't the stats that built the myth, it was the fire, the raw, chest-pounding, floor-slapping, eyes-blazing fire. The intensity that made teammates play harder or get out of the way. He didn't need the spotlight, but when it came, he didn't flinch. What had once been whispers and doubt were now questions posed in awe. How is this kid so ready for grown man pain? But the truth was quieter. He wasn't ready. He was willing, and sometimes that's the difference. Because readiness bends under pressure, but willingness, that burns. And Kevin Garnett was only just beginning to catch fire. The winters in Minnesota do something to a man. They teach quiet. They teach survival. The wind slices sideways, and the cold doesn't just settle on your skin. It moves into your bones. You learn to weather it, or you go. Kevin Garnett arrived. In Minneapolis, young, but not naive. He knew he wasn't walking into legacy. Not yet. Minnesota wasn't known for banners, or rings, or glory. It was a franchise, still looking for its soul. What Kevin didn't realize at first, though, was that he would be asked to become it. They gave him years, gave him the ball, gave him the burden, and he took it. Game after game, minute after minute, Kevin became more than a forward. He became the heartbeat. With every possession, he poured himself flat into the floor, screamed into empty corners, slammed sweat into jerseys that hadn't earned it yet. He was effort incarnate, and some nights effort was all they had. He didn't complain, not out loud, but behind every scream was a plea. Bring more, meet me here, fight like I'm fighting. But teammates changed, rotations flickered, wins remained elusive. Minnesota didn't reload, it rebuilt again, and Kevin stayed. In 2004, it nearly all aligned. A season like wind finally blowing with you instead of against. Sam Cassell, wise and wild. Latrell Sprewell, all edge. Kevin at his apex to 58 wins, MVP, ferocious beauty in every possession. They reached the Western Conference Finals that spring, and the state held its breath. For a moment, you could believe, really believe, that years of sacrifice were being hardened into something golden dot. But then small things cracked. Injuries, bad matchups, missed chances. The Lakers came through like a storm that understood history. And the door finally opened, slammed shut. And after that, the climb back grew steeper. He'd sleep less, talk less, but he never stopped, never coasted. Losing only burned him more, and yet he stayed, year after year. While lesser players asked out, while analysts begged him to run toward rings, toward easier paths, he stayed. Some called it noble, others foolish. But Kevin didn't speak in theory. He spoke in sweat, in loyalty, to city, to teammates, to a promise he'd long since whispered to himself. If they give me the keys, I won't quit the engine. Minnesota never felt like a national stage. Headlines skipped over snowbound stadiums. But inside the Target Center, something real pulsed. A man giving every cell of himself to a cause few understood. Somewhere in those middle years, you could sense it, weariness, lacing his explosiveness. Like he wasn't jumping for glory anymore, but to scream away the silence. Love is complicated like that, especially when the thing you love won't love you back with wins, loyalty. Left unrequited too long becomes loneliness, eventually even. He started to feel it in his chest. The exhaustion, not of running, but of standing still, while everyone else passed judgment from safer positions, and yet he stayed. Until one day, something inside him shifted. Not a betrayal, not a surrender. Just a whisper behind his ribs that said, "You've done your part. This isn't abandonment. This is survival." And somewhere in the east, a door opened. Not just any door, but one lined with gold trim, pressure, and immortality. He didn't know it yet, but another kind of winter was waiting. One not built of cold, but of legacy, and the fire he stoked. Alone in Minnesota was about to meet its match in a city that spoke his language out loud, Boston. He hadn't asked for change, but there it was, wrapped in green and echoes of legends. 12 years, that's how long he'd held Minnesota aloft, like a lighthouse trying to call in ships that never came. He'd given them everything, even the parts of himself he didn't know he had. But eventually, the math got louder than the memories. No rings, no deep playoff runs that lasted, no validation for all the scar tissue. So when the Timberwolves said maybe it was time, he listened. And for the first time in his career, he let go. Across the country, a city was waiting. Boston, not gentle, not forgiving, but honest. A city that didn't pat you on the back unless you'd bled for it. A city that remembered every jersey, every game, every sin. And within that city, a franchise long haunted by banners. Not because they'd been forgotten, but because they were sacred. Retired numbers hung like ghosts. Oversized names carved into wood, brick, conversations. This was no rebuild. This was a resurrection. Garnett arrived with eyes sharp but tired, joined by Paul Pierce, all grit and scars and calm fire, and Ray Allen mechanics smooth as snowfall. Every jumper a kind of gospel. Together, they weren't just old, they were ready. Not every team becomes a family, but some pain recognizes itself in another. Pierce, loyal through years of Boston's own darkness. Allen, searching for a symphony after stretches of solo play. And Kevin, still burning, still desperate, not for points, but for meaning. From day one, it clicked loud. Defense like breath, rotations that felt like rhythm sections. Ball movement so exact, even Larry would have nodded. But most of all, it was the urgency. Because when you've been denied long enough, you stop playing to win and start playing like losing would erase you. They defended like their names were on trial. They rebounded like it could erase history. Garnett anchored it all, chest out, sweat flying, voice louder than the rafters. He slapped the court like it talked back. He screamed in timeouts. Even when up 20, he told anyone who would listen, "This is different." And for once, it was. They lost just 4 games at home all season. Boston didn't just watch, it leaned in, remembered how to love again. The city's love is tough. You earn it. But when they give it, it's yours forever. And when the playoffs came, something ancient stirred. The spirit of teams passed. Echoes of Russell, Cowens, Maxwell. They beat Atlanta, then Cleveland, then Detroit. Brick by brick. And standing between them and a title, the Lakers' old enemy. Familiar tension. The series twisted Hollywood flair on one end, Boston bedrock on the other. And on a June night in 2008, in Game 6, the dam broke, explosion, 131-92. The Garden didn't just cheer, it howled, like it had been holding its breath since '86. When the final buzzer rang, Garnett stood in the middle of it all, jersey soaked, eyes wide, hands on his knees, like he couldn't believe it would ever end the way he'd dreamed. And then he collapsed to the floor, not with boast, not with arrogance, but with release. He kissed the hardwood and whispered something only quiet fire would understand. Anything is possible, 7 syllables. Carved into Boston's memory, that banner, number 17, it had weight. Not just because of the win, but because of the waiting it healed. He had chased meaning for years. And in Boston, he found it not in the ring, but in the raw, in the teammates who bled with him, in the city that screamed back. But time, even in triumph, doesn't freeze. It pushes, and as he stood tall and green, the leaves around him began to fall. One by one, Ray left. Paul aged, the bench changed. Quietly, so did Kevin. The fire was still there, but now it flickered near the edges of night. Boston had given him everything he'd asked for, and now it asked gently, what comes next? He had loved before, but this time it loved him back, and that kind of love, you never forget the sound it makes. He didn't plan for it to feel this way. The jersey was new, black and white, sleek, sharp, but not warm, not familiar. Not holy, just different. And maybe that was the point. Start again, reignite the fire, build something fresh out of the remaining years. Brooklyn was sharp-edged and impatient, a city that didn't honor the past unless you brought the present with you. And for Kevin, now in his mid-30s, the present didn't move quite as easily. His feet were heavier, knees barked more. The ferocity still came, still roared, but not as often, not start to finish. It arrived in flashes, bursts of the old thunder. In those early games, he'd dive for loose balls out of instinct. The crowd roared with surprise, then reverence. He still slapped the floor sometimes, even if the floor didn't always answer back. And beside him, familiar faces in new colors. Paul Pierce, war-worn and loyal. Jason Terry, Joe Johnson. Darren Williams, younger, quicker, already carrying weight of his own. On paper, they were contenders. On paper, but paper can't hold chemistry. Paper can't hold time. Losses stacked too quickly, roles blurred, minutes were inconsistent. And Kevin, whose game had always been built on rhythm, found himself out of sync with his own body. This wasn't Boston. This wasn't even Minnesota. Brooklyn didn't need saving. It needed results. And results came slow. He adjusted, turned down the volume, turned up the education. Teammates recall how he mentored them in quiet corners, in film sessions, mid-dash huddle. He spoke of defense like scripture, of footwork like it belonged in ballet, of sacrifice like an obligation not to coach or fans or owner but to the game itself. He was still teaching, still leading, just differently now. And as the playoffs dimmed from possible to abstract, he didn't rage, not like before. There were no thrown towels, no bloody jerseys. Age had brought something unnerving. Calm, but inside that calm, the fire still hissed. He still mourned being unable to bend the floor to his will. Still lay in bed after losses, staring at ceilings that wouldn't blink back. There were games where he'd hit that mid-range jumper, that silky elbow shot, and jog back, grinning like he'd never aged at all. Moments that made the arena remember, but they were just that moments. Eventually, the minutes faded. Starters gave way to rotations, stardom to mentorship. He moved to the bench, then behind it, not bitter, just quieter. He watched carefully, gave the young guys looks when they missed box outs, or when they didn't hustle a screen. They knew better than to ignore that look. He hadn't lost his edge. He'd just sheathed it in wisdom. Reporters asked if he regretted it coming to Brooklyn, chasing something that never appeared. He'd shrug. It's the league, he'd say. You don't get to pick how it ends. But even in the stillness, he made ripples. His presence whispered insistence, respect, intensity. Even at rest, and sometimes at practice, with cameras off, he'd lace up tight, call for the rock, and take some young center to skeleton footers, fades, that impossible pivot into a shoulder. Fake then, he'd laugh, just once, sharp and low. A reminder, not of what he was, but of what he earned. He didn't need statues. He didn't ask for farewell tours, new parades, new confetti. He just wanted to leave the game standing up. As the Brooklyn chapter wound down, he felt it again, that pull, not toward another shot at glory, but toward stillness. Not the same stillness as the golden silence in Malden, but the stillness of a story coming close to finished. He didn't come back to chase ghosts. He came home because something inside him still echoed, still burned, even if slower now. The game wasn't calling. Not in a loud, headline-shouting way, but in the way an old song sometimes plays from a room you thought was empty, Minnesota, where it had begun, where boy turned into myth, myth into man, man into monument. He returned not as savior, but as reminder that everything worth building takes time, and sometimes circles must close to be complete. He walked into the target center with gray at his temples and a body stitched together by time. He wasn't planning to save anything, just wanting to look around, breathe it in, speak to the rafters in a way only they might understand. And when his name was announced and the crowd stood, there was no roar to match the one inside him, because it wasn't just a cheer, it was a welcome, a thank you, a we remember. He didn't play every night. That wasn't the point anymore. His minutes came in spells, carefully, sparingly, but still, when he slammed down a putback or barked directions on a switch, it felt like lightning trapped in an old bottle, breaking free one more time. The young ones watched Towns, Wiggins, players, still learning how to carry weight without breaking under it. And Garnett, he showed them, with presence, with poise, with the same ferocity layered now in patience. They said he never turned down an elbow-to-elbow drill, still boxed out like it meant something, still whispered to teammates about screen angles and spacing, the teachings of a man who once ate through games, now feeding them forward. But under it all, there was quiet, a different kind than the one he'd known as a boy. Not tense, not loaded, not silence as survival. This was the hush of reflection, of return. The stillness of a man walking once more through the house he helped build, with dusty shoes and grateful eyes. He didn't chase a spotlight. He signed no farewell tour contract, gave no press conference filled with tears and trophies, just stepped back, like someone slipping out of a conversation after saying all they needed to say. And when the jersey came down from the rafters, when the crowd stood for a number now made eternal, KG didn't pose. He didn't puff out his chest. He looked up, eyes rimmed with memory, and nodded once, not to the fans, to the sweat, to the practices, to the nights his knees ached and his heart burned, and no one outside the gym knew how much he gave to the kid in Malden, bent under a crooked rim, to the ghost of every teammate who'd tried to meet him halfway, to the echoes that filled the space between missed shots and second chances. He nodded to all of it, because when legends end, they don't go out in fire. They vanish slowly, stitch by stitch, into the very fabric of the game they loved. Today, Kevin Garnett is louder than ever, in his own way. He speaks now in studios, on panels, with that same brand of furious truth, but see closely and you'll spot it. The same boy who once whispered dreams into pine trees, still learning, still burning. He tells stories now, about battles, about passion, about what the game took and what it gave, about being misunderstood but never misaligned. He stays close to the game, not because he needs it, but because the world makes more sense through that orange rim. No championships can measure him now. No stat line can translate his impact, because Kevin Garnett didn't change the game by dominating it. He changed it by refusing to give less than everything. He made work sacred, made effort holy, made intensity contagious, and in doing so, he made room for a new kind of player, part soldier, part artist, all heart. His name belongs with the greats, not just for what he won, but for what he gave away across decades. And when the ball finally stops bouncing, when the cheering fades, his shadow stays, not on highlight reels, but on hardwood sweat stains, on locker room chalk talks, on every high school court where a quiet kid grits his teeth and thinks, I'm not there yet, but I will be. Because Kevin Garnett's legacy isn't carved in gold. It lives in whispers, in silence awakened, in stillness that once burned, and it says simply this: work matters, energy echoes, and sometimes the loudest fire starts in a whisper.